There we go. All right. Thank you. This is Advanced Kendo UI. How is the Wi-Fi in here? Does everybody have connectivity? There's some interactive portions of this. I don't know how well it's going to go. If the Wi-Fi is sketchy, we may skip over those parts. If not, we'll try to make it work. All right, let's do work. This is Advanced Kendo UI. This is a code-heavy session. There's going to be times in here where we're going to look at a lot of code. And I know that we're sort of deep into the conference, and you know we had that great Aerosmith cover band last night. It was amazing. I know, right? It's so good. The science. I know how that band got started. Somebody told that dude 30 years ago. They were like, "Has anybody ever told you look like Steven Tyler?" And then 30 years later, we have the Aerosmith cover band. So yeah, there's a lot of code here. We're going to get through it. We may not get through all of it, but all of this is available online as well. All the slides will be posted, so I'll at least give you that. And then we'll ask you to fill out surveys at the end, and I would really appreciate surveys for this session so that I can know. It's the first time I've given it, so the next one, you know, if there's stuff I need to pull out or things that are just terrible, if there's too much code, not enough code, you don't like the colors, I'm too bald, whatever, let me know. Although I can't help you on the last one, believe me, I've tried. My name is Burke Holland. I was, a little bit of history here, I started with the Kendo UI project in 2011. Which at that time, Kendo UI was in beta, and I'd been working a lot with jQuery UI, so that's when I joined the team. You can find me on Twitter at @BurkeHolland. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is the home of country music. I'm not a fan of country music, and I say that, and I don't mean to denigrate those of you who are country music fans. And for country music fans, denigrate means put down. It's all downhill from here. Here we go. All right, here we go. Let's get started straight out. The first thing that you need to know to master Kendo UI is you got to know jQuery. There's no way around it. You can't skip it. You have to know jQuery. If you don't have a mastery of jQuery, you cannot master Kendo UI. For those of you who are not familiar with sort of Kendo and the way that the martial art works, it's very similar to like karate and some of the other martial arts in that it goes by a Dan ranking system. That's what they call that Dan system. A lot of times you see belts representing the Dan system, but they're not always the same. So in Kendo UI, there's no black belt, but there is what they call an 8th Dan of Kendo UI, which is the highest you can go in Kendo UI. There's only 4 people alive that have reached the 8th Dan of the martial arts. So what we're really going for here in terms of development is really to reach that 8th Dan of Kendo UI. And the Kendo UI, the Kendoka, which is what we call this little, the figure here, the getup, their primary weapon is this thing called the boken, and that's this wooden sword that you see. And I know that, is there anybody in here that actually does Kendo, like as a okay, so this guy's going to come correct me.
It's a shinai.
Is it? It's a shinai? No, that's a boken. A shinai is different, isn't it? Can we pretend it's a boken for the sake of presentation? All right, put that in the eval. Okay, great. I have to change that out. So that is either a boken or it's not a boken. It's a shinai. We'll figure that out later. Anyway, you can think of the jQuery as the unnamed wooden sword of the Kendoka, right? I mean, that's really your mastery of that. It's going to be dependent upon your mastery of Kendo UI. It's going to be your mastery of jQuery. So here's the interactive part. So let's try this and see how this goes. And when I talk about mastering jQuery, I don't mean like selecting elements. I mean like looping functions like grep and each and find and knowing when to use those. Things like proxy, knowing what proxy does and why you need it. On and event delegation, knowing when events bubble and where they're executed when they're bubbling up through an event tree. jQuery's sort of weird promise pattern, which is deferreds and how those work. End, which really has to do with jQuery chaining and how you sort of move about inside of the chaining of jQuery, and then object extension and so much more, right? Like you can go on and on and on just about jQuery. You can go to workshops for days about jQuery, but you got to master it. So let's do it like this. Let's do this. If everybody could go to this site here, I don't know if you can see this. Maybe can you guys see this, or do I need to zoom in right there? Can you see it in the back? Can't see it in the back? Let me see here. Let's turn accessibility. I think I can actually, yeah. Oh, look at me. Can you see it now? Still can't see it? Yeah, you can see it now, right there. Okay, so if everybody can sort of go to this URL here, and it's anonymous, and all we're going to do is just sort of get a feel, and I want you to be honest on how you feel your expertise is with jQuery, right? On a scale of 1 to 10. If you think, you don't know much about jQuery, right? Or you're like, I have no idea what that is. Is that something for Java? No, it's not. Please rank yourself as a 0. If you know a lot about jQuery, right? Like if your last name is Rezig, then please, be honest. Say that you're a 10. But it's anonymous, so let's get a good feel for how we're doing. If you're a tweener and you want to text it, you can do that too. I don't know. I don't think anybody wants to do that though. All right, are we good? Does everybody have the URL? Can I back up a bit? Let's back up here. All right, so we can see the results coming in here. So good. So most people are being very, I thank you for your honesty. We got some 8s here. John Rezig is not here. I like the person who's like, yep, I don't know what jQuery is. That sounds really weird and maybe a little inappropriate. I don't know. All right, so good. Let's move on then. Let's go out of here. The other thing that you're going to need to know before you can master Kendo UI is you got to know JavaScript. Kendo UI is at its foundation of JavaScript library. That's what it is. Even if you're using the MVC wrappers, can I see a show of hands for people that are using MVC wrappers for Kendo UI in here? ASP.NET MVC? Okay. What about people that are using just the straight JavaScript for Kendo UI? Any of those folks in here? Okay, so more people are using that. So even if you're using the ASP.NET MVC wrappers, you're still using JavaScript. It's just Razor's spitting that out for you. And so if you can learn the JavaScript, at the end of the day, you're more powerful in that way. And these are things like closures, right? Promises inside of JavaScript, similar to deferreds. Lexical scoping, how does that work in JavaScript? It can be very confusing. Advanced concepts like currying. How do objects work? Variable hoisting inside of JavaScript as well. So some of these advanced concepts, and these are really just sort of dealing with the goofiness of the JavaScript language and sort of wrangling that and bringing that all in. So let's do this again. Let's do it just like we did before. And I'll zoom in here so you can get this poll address here. And so same thing. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rank yourself and your mastery of JavaScript? Because knowing jQuery is not the same as knowing plain JavaScript, right? If you've got on skinny jeans and a scarf and some Buddy Holly glasses, right, then you're probably a 10, right? But if you're like me and you're not so great at JavaScript, you'd like to be, but you're not so great, be honest, I'm probably a 4. I'm just being honest. I wish I was better. I'm not. There's some people on the DevRel team, like Cody Lindley, that are probably more likely a 10. All right, so let's zoom out on this a little bit. All right, nobody answered. Wait, check out how tight my skinny jeans are. Yep, so one person feels like they're an 11. Or maybe this just isn't working, I don't know. Oh, did it not change? No. Well, that didn't work so well. All right, moving on. All right, let's get directly to our advanced concepts. So the first one, and some of you may be like, I already know about this stuff. That's great. Please provide that in the feedback so I know where everybody stands. But the first one that I want to talk about is the Kendo object that is on the window, right? So this is essentially, when you have jQuery, you have a $sign or you have a jQuery object on the window. We're talking about Kendo UI. Kendo is that object on the window where everything originates. So let's take a look at that. Here's an example, and I'm just going to, let's actually do this because I don't like the resolution here is so bad. Let's open this in a new tab. This is an example of the stringify function. Now, all this is in the documentation, but what stringify does is it takes objects and it turns them into JSON strings. So if we run this, you see here we have this object person, first name, last name, and then children, and then I'll run this, and what we'll see is the JSON output. Now this is important to have because if you have an object and you need to send that object to the server, then you need to stringify it first, otherwise the server's not going to know what to do with it. Unless you're using the MVC wrappers, which are actually doing this for you under the covers, right? So you're essentially serializing your objects here. Now what's important to note is that this function here is, guys, do I need to up the text size in the back of the room? Are we, okay, I do? Okay. Here we go. This function here actually doesn't show up in the JSON string over here, right? So stringify is smart enough to know, I can't stringify a function, so I'm just not going to do it. Because in Kendo UI, your objects and your models are oftentimes going to have properties and they're also going to have functions. and you want to send the properties, but you don't want to send the functions. Now, stringify is a fallback for JSON.stringify, which is supported in most modern browsers, but not all modern browsers. Like, I don't think IE7 supports stringify. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that. And Kendo UI is compatible. Anybody using IE7 on a daily basis? Oh, good. This guy right here. Okay, there's a support group later. We're going to go. All the SharePoint people are going to be there too, so you'll be in good company. No, but the thing is, a lot of people are still supporting older browsers. What about IE8? IE8, okay, this guy, man, I really appreciate the courage of people to step out and be like, yeah, I do. But oftentimes you don't have a choice, right? Like, you don't pick IE8. Nobody goes in and is like, hey, what are you using, Chrome 43? What about IE8, right? Nobody does that. So when you have to be cross-browser like that, then you have to start dealing with all these quirks. And so Kendo UI abstracts a lot of this cross-platform silliness away from you, and stringify is just one of the ways that it does that. Let's do another one off the base. There's so many off the base objects, I can't go through them all, but I want to go through the ones that I find that I use the most. Another one is keys. Let's open this here. Where is my open in frame? Open in a new tab. So I'm just going to go ahead and, oh, I can't, oh, nice. Collapse the splitter? Nope. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and basically what it's doing is it's iterating through this kendos.keys object right here. You can see this here. And it's spitting out each one of the values that's on this object. And if you see over here on the side, you can see insert is 45, delete's 46, backspace is 8, tab is 9. Now, the way that you use this is when you're trying to listen for key presses in the browser, but nobody can ever remember what those key presses map to because they map to car codes. So when you actually hit a key like the spacebar, spacebar. Now, how do I know that's the spacebar? I know that's the spacebar because I just looked at the car code and then I asked Kendo UI what the key is. Now, this is really powerful if you're using your keyboard for navigation, or you're trying to listen for an enter, and you want to do something when somebody hits backspace, or something like that. Kendo keys is a powerful sort of array of common items here. Enter keys, another one. And this is one that I find myself using all the time. That's Kendo keys, also off of the Kendo object. Let's do another one. Let's do, oh, this is a fun one. Let's do this one. Let me open this one up here. Why do I have to do it twice? This is a Chrome extension that's going to get a bad review from one guy in Nashville. All right, here we go, load it up. Let's do this, let's run it first. So Kendo has this idea, because it is cross-browser, Kendo UI, of this idea of support. And it does a lot of these things for you under the covers that you're not really thinking about, right? So it has to be aware of things like, does this browser support Microsoft pointer events, which has been a subject of a lot of controversy lately with the other browser vendors and Microsoft, and Apple's not going to support it, and Google's not, then Google is, and Apple's still not, and everybody's losing their minds on Twitter when they should probably do something else. But those kinds of things, because if you have pointer events, you want to use them. If you don't have pointer events, what are you going to do? Right? But you don't want to have to worry about that. Again, additionally, things like transitions and transforms, which are sort of advanced CSS functions here. Kendo UI is aware of those as well. But the ones that I really like, and the one that I use a lot, is this mobile OS, support mobile OS. And the reason why is because sometimes in your web applications you'll want to know, am I on a mobile device? Am I on a desktop? Because I may want to do things a little bit differently. And so let me show you first a real live example of that. So I'm going to jump over here. Let's tell you what, let's do a new tab. And let's go to kendoflatthemes.com. Now this is a site that I made for Kendo UI Mobile because I thought that there weren't enough good themes for Kendo UI Mobile, and so I went and created some additional themes. You guys can go out here and grab these themes that I stole from the material design spec with these nice colors. And this is all nice and good, except for I wanted this site to also work on a mobile device. And so basically what I do here, and we'll open up the developer tools here, and we'll just emulate. And then I know this is really small here. I can't really fix that on an iPhone 6. And see how it kind of shows up and it's real small? We don't want that. What I really wanted was like the entire theme. And so let me just go ahead and refresh this page. And so what I do is I actually look at that Kendo support.mobileOS, and if it's a mobile OS, I just go directly to that right there, right? And then I can pick the themes directly from here. So you can see that well, that didn't work. If it worked, it would be awesome. Didn't work just now, but you should be able to select the themes from there. And that way the mobile experience is good on the mobile device and the desktop experience is good on the desktop device. And the only thing I really did to do that was if kendo.support.mobileOS, show this page. If not, show that page. Easy enough. So that is mobile OS. Excuse me, that is support here. You can also do things like detecting the OS, the operating system, detecting the browser, all sorts of stuff. I strongly encourage you to go through here and sort of check this out. This is another interesting one. If you work with colors a lot, you will find yourself trying to move between different color formats. I mean, now we have hex, there's RGB, there's RGBA, there's HSL. Am I missing any? I know there's at least one more. Anyway, Kendo UI will actually parse between these different color formats. And just to show you that, I've written just sort of this example application here. And what it does is, it's very simple. It basically just takes a value from one side. So if I say, this is like my favorite shade of blue, I can convert this to RGB just like that. And I can convert back the other way too. And the way this works is you can see right here, see this, let me just go in a little bit. See this var color equals kendo.parseColor, right? And then basically I'm saying give me the R, the G, and the B, and then I can get the alpha value as well, or I can get the HSL. And so I can convert between color formats. This is actually what's the backbone of the Kendo UI color picker. It's what's happening under the scenes, but you have direct access to that. So if you're working with colors, keep in mind that this is available for you. Oh, sweet. What happened? That was awesome. Let's start all over. Oh no, right there, perfect. Okay, so let's move on. Again, tons more stuff off the Kendo object. Please visit the documentation, look at all the good stuff. That's a lot of fun. I want to talk about classes for a second inside of Kendo UI. When I was trying to understand classes in JavaScript, I went to Stack Overflow. And somebody had put, what is the best the question was, and I wish I couldn't find it, the question was, what is the best explanation of classes for someone who doesn't understand classes in JavaScript? And somebody posted this diagram and was like, I found this and it's super helpful. And there's like, people are like voting it, they're like, yeah, it's so good. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, if I didn't understand classes before, I really don't understand them now, right? Like, this is just, I don't even know what's going on here. There's like an object and there's like a prototype. There's prototypes everywhere. There's a prototype constructor, I don't know what the hell that is. I mean, this is a mess, right? This is awful. The problem is classes, because JavaScript doesn't really have classes as we typically know them as a language feature, it really is that awful. And that's unfortunate. The good news is, though, that Kendo UI actually abstracts this away for you so that you can create classes in Kendo UI without having to mess with any of this. Because in order to build classes in JavaScript, you're going to have to understand prototypes. You're going to have to understand dunder prototypes. And if you've never heard that word before, you can go Google it after this session. That's actually a term, dunder prototype. So let's take a look at how Kendo UI sort of abstracts this away. Let me pull out my phone here and make sure we're staying on track. 2:50, where did the time go? I probably spent too much time looking at the useless web. Open in a new tab. Let's crank the font. Yeah, font size is already cranked up here. So here we go. And again, this is where we're going to start getting a little bit codey, and I'm sorry, we got, the resolution is cranked up real high here, so this is going to wrap a lot. It's going to be a little bit hard to read. In this scenario, what's happening, and you don't really need to digest all this code, you just sort of need to get the overall idea here. But in this scenario, what I'm doing is I'm creating a new object that I can then call as a new class. So if you're doing C#, I'm essentially creating a class here. And on this class, I'm calling this init function. Now this init function is a constructor. It gets called for you automatically. You don't have to call it, and you can pass anything into it. And then inside of that, anything that I attach to this is actually the class, so that it becomes a property. The way that we do things in JavaScript is we make things that are publicly available. They're just this.some method. What do we do if they're privately available? Does anybody know what we do if they're private? underscore, right, in front of the method name. So if you're ever looking at JavaScript and you see an underscore, what does that mean? Don't use it. It's not for you. It's for the class. Unless you're using underscore the framework, and now I'm sure everybody's sufficiently confused. But yeah, if you ever see underscores, those are internal methods to be used by the class, not by you. And so we have things like create session, right? Like that's me. I don't want other people using that. But because JavaScript doesn't have this idea of accessors, right? Like this thing's public, this thing's private. We put underscores in front of things as sort of a denotation to the developer not to do that. And then in this case, I'm actually connecting to a Progress OpenEdge database, right? This is and you don't need to know anything about OpenEdge other than it's a legacy system, right? It's a legacy database. I don't even know what the format is. I don't know how to query it. I do know that there's a JavaScript object that they expose, and I want to take that and I want to wrap it up into a class so I can reuse it. So you can see here that there's a service URI, there's a catalog URI, and basically I just create a new JSDO, which we just did up top, and I pass in that service URI and that catalog URI, and then this third parameter, and then I call this fill method on the class, and what happens is I get data back from that legacy system, right? So if my OpenEdge developer can give me that plain JavaScript object or even those RESTful endpoints, I can now create these reusable classes so that I can do this over and over again. And once I have this class, I can import this into my page, and anybody else that needs to use it doesn't have to know anything about even the underlying implementation, which is up here, of this like add session. They don't need to know any of that. All they need to know is the URLs, they've got the class, they're good to go, right? This is good code reusability. Alrighty here. Let's do another one, classical inheritance. This is a great one. Somebody once said that inheritance is a socially acceptable form of tight coupling. Does anybody know what I mean when I say that? So tight coupling is this idea that if one piece of code depends on another piece of code, that's bad. Because if one piece of code changes, then it's highly likely that the other piece of code is going to break as well. Because the two things are tightly coupled together. And we typically don't want that in applications. However, there are times when inheritance is important and it is useful. I would say, though, in JavaScript, I hardly ever see a valid use case for inheritance. I see a lot of use cases for classes. I hardly ever see a valid use case for inheriting from classes. An exception to that rule would be inside of Kendo UI itself, because Kendo UI inherits from widget, inherits from, like you'll have like a list view, which inherits from the base list component, and on it goes. But in most practical applications, you will not find yourself using inheritance. Disclaimer in place. Let's look at how it works. Bump over here in a new tab. All right, so in this example, what we've got here is I've created a new class, and it's just called person, and we've got this idea of this constructor, which we've looked at before, right? A first name and a last name, and then I'm also passing in this Boolean value as to whether or not this person's on the dark side, and then a function to say hello, and basically I'm just looking if this person's on the dark side. If they're not on the dark side, we're going to say hello. If they are, then we're just going to mind choke the person. So we should just say, we should be able to say in theory, we can say var Luke equals new person, and then we'll say his first name is Luke, his last name is course, and not on the dark side. And then we should just be able to say Luke, say hello. Right. And let's run this. Right? Hello, my name is Luke Skywalker. And we also should be able to do the same thing, and if we passed in false here, or true rather, that he is on the dark side, we should get mind choke. All right, so that works. Now what we might want to do though is person may be our base type, but we may have another type of person. I'm going to go down and grab some code I've already got here. So let's grab this here. And you know what, I'm going to grab this whole chunk and move it up. And let's take this out. We'll pop this in. All right, so we may have some, another type of object that, we want to inherit from person. So we still want to be able to say hello. They could still be on the dark side, and maybe we'll call this a rebel, right? And then in the init function, in order to actually call the base class, we have to do this person fn init.call, which is basically like your, in Java, it's super, what is it in C#? Base? Is it base? Right. So this is your base in JavaScript for Kendo UI. Now again, None of these concepts exist in JavaScript, right? JavaScript has no idea what we're doing right here. We're basically mocking up a class type structure in JavaScript based on the functionality that Kendo UI has given us. So if we run this, you can see here we've got me, I'm a rebel, Darth is just a person, and then we can even look at and get an instance of or check to see what sort of types we've got in the system. So considering that JavaScript doesn't even have the notion of classes at all, Kendo UI provides you those classes, but it also provides you the inheritance, and it provides you the type checking, which is actually kind of pretty cool. All right, let's do more. Ooh, custom widgets. Here we go. Let's do a custom widget. And I'm sorry for the folks in the back. I don't think I can make this any bigger. You guys just need to stare harder, I guess would be my recommendation for you. You can create your own widgets in Kendo UI. We don't support them per se, but we do encourage you to do this because oftentimes you're going to need a widget that doesn't exist, and you can even make composite widgets, which we'll look at in a minute, and that's really neat. At the top, we've got some basic basically all I'm doing is shortening up variable names at the top here. And then, see this my widget is widget.extend. Now everything in Kendo UI comes off of, inherits from widget. Everything is extended from widget. If you take the Kendo UI certification exam, that question is on the exam, and now you know the answer. What is it? What does everything inherit from? Widget. All right, good. Everything has an init function. Why does it have an init function? Because it's a class, and that's the constructor, right? We just looked at all that. You guys are experts already. And then it gets called, and we have an element. That's the element that we called the widget on, right? So if we grabbed an element and said Kendo UI grid, we're going to get that element, that div or table. And then we're going to get the options that we passed in as well. What are the options? The options are that object. When we go in, and if you go in and configure a grid, you're putting in like pageable, sortable, all that stuff, options, right? So we're getting both of those things. And then we're doing this widget.fn.init.call, which is what? Base or super. Any Java people in here? Right there? All right, man. Cool. Stay up. You know what? The best quote I ever heard about Java is that it's a very powerful tool for turning XML into stack traces. Have you ever heard that one before? I'm not a Java developer. Is that true? I know. I'm just kidding, man. I love you. You're the best natured person in this room. You took that like a champ. Okay. It's terrible jokes, man. I think I've insulted 2 different large groups of people in the span of 30 minutes. 4, yeah. Was it 4? Okay. All right, I'm terrible. I need help. I'm going to get it. Okay, so we're calling this, we're basically, right, this is the base, that's the super. And then we can also override our options and give that widget a name. And then right here is where we're actually adding the widget into the Kendo UI namespace so that we can then say, select some element and then say my widget, right? Whatever, right here it's called my widget, so that's what we'd actually use. And then over here, this is an example of, again, please don't try to digest all this code, you can't. But this is just an example of a simple repeater that's been implemented in Kendo UI and actually uses a data source. All of this is documented. If you just go out and Google like create custom Kendo UI widget, you'll find a blog post that walks you through all of this. Don't need to digest this right now. I throw this up here to point out, though, that you can tie into data sources, you can tie into the model view model binding for your Kendo UI widgets, and you can do pretty much anything. You can even bind into all the different events that are happening. So in this case, this widget will take a data source and it will iterate over it, and then it'll just spit out the results based on a template. Let's take a look at an example. This is a composite widget that I wrote. And what it does is it goes out and it searches, it does 2 things. It searches YouTube for videos, which why do you need that? It's arguable, but it also applies Google's autocorrect to the results, right? So if I'm looking for a Taylor Swift video and I'm like, oops, that didn't go as planned. No, let's go here. So let's say I can't spell Taylor Swift, right? It automatically corrects that for me. And then the other cool thing is, let's do this. YouTube device support. I don't even no idea what that even is. Let's try this again. All right, so it looks like my connection just sort of flaked out on me here. Let's see. All right, so YouTube looks like YouTube's giving me the cold shoulder, but here, this is a list view. There's a pager in here. If I click on this, I get a Kendo UI window, right? So I've got 3 or 4 different widgets inside of a composite widget. And if you actually go back and look at the code that runs this widget, and again, this is in a blog post, you can see how to build this widget yourself. You'll see that basically all I'm doing is selecting a div and calling YouTube on it. And that's what we want, is this encapsulation of all this logic so that we can reuse this code in other places. So that if somebody asks me, do you have a widget for Kendo UI? I can be like, yeah, here it is. There you go. And you automatically get all these things without having to do anything about that. I hate that this demo didn't work because there's this wonderful video that I really wanted you guys to see. It's so good. We'll try it one more time. It's so worth waiting for. I blame the Wi-Fi. It's not going to work. I'll have to figure that out later. All right. Moving on. Let's see here. All right. Let's talk about promises. People in here, can I get a show of hands, like, how many people are familiar with promises in JavaScript? Okay, good. So a good chunk of you. So basically, if you're familiar with promises, this is not going to be anything new for you. In this case, let's come over here and open in a new tab. In this case, we've got the same class we're reading from that OpenEdge legacy system, but you'll notice here at the bottom that we're actually, when I call fill, which happens here, this jsdo.fill, there's this event that gets subscribed to after fill, and then after fill gets called, and then I'm looping through, and then I'm writing these things out to the page, and this works, right? Like if I run this, I'll get this written out to the page. What's wrong with this? Can anybody tell me what's the inherent problem with this? You may see it. The problem is, say that again?
Hard to follow. It's gibberish.
It's gibberish and it's hard to follow. And the other major problem with it is that this is asynchronous. So when I call this fill down here, I've got no idea when that data is going to come back. When's it going to come back? When it's good and ready, right? Like that's the answer. Nobody knows. And so that's the inherent problem. The other problem is that this class's job is to go get the data, not write the data out to the page, because then if I want to go change the way that it does that, I have to modify the class as well. It's not good. We want to split that out. So one of the ways that we can do that is like this. Let's open in a new tab. And we'll go down here. And basically, what we can do here is instead of writing out in the actual after fill here, let's see, right here, we can pass in a callback. Now, callbacks are how you normally handle asynchronous operations in JavaScript. So basically, I'm saying, I'm going to call this fill method, and then I'm going to pass you a function that I want you to execute when you're done with that. And if we do that down here at the bottom, that's what we're doing. We're calling fill, and then we're passing a function in. But again, there's nothing wrong with this, but this is kind of verbose. And if you have a method that executes a callback, that executes a callback, that then executes a callback, we call that, anybody know? Callback hell, anybody? It's called callback hell, yeah. It's really bad, and it's incredibly hard to debug, and it's a nightmare. And so one of the ways that we get around that, or we try to make that a little bit better, is with something called promises. If you're not familiar with promises, you'll start to see this everywhere. Promises are not a new piece of functionality in JavaScript, they're just a pattern. So let's look at how those work. How much time do we have? Oh, we got good. We have 10 minutes. Let's look at promises here. Let's open in a new tab. And so the way that we're going to do it this time is, let's see, let me find my function here. We've got this object here that I've created called, where is that bad boy? Defer, where's the deferred? Oh, it's right there. Okay, so this, what I've got right here is this.onFill equals deferred. Now, we talked about deferred in learning your jQuery. Deferreds are jQuery's promises, and Kendo UI doesn't implement a promise pattern because we've got them in jQuery, so we just use jQuery deferreds. When I say jQuery's got like an odd implementation of the promise pattern, there's a lot of academics who will sit down and say like, it doesn't properly conform to the spec, and I'm like, I don't care, does it work? But that's just me personally. So I use deferreds all the time, and I never have any problem with them. And the cool thing about deferreds is that you can say, basically what a deferred does is it is an object that knows what to do when the data comes back. And so you can say, you can create this object and say, if it fails, do this, if it's successful, do this. And you actually get to do that outside the class. So you can see that it gets resolved right here. So we're basically resolving the promise here and passing back the data. And then back down here, instead of that callback, we have fill, and then we have then. But we're still passing a function in. There's still a callback, right? We're still doing something. So how is this different or better than callbacks? It's not necessarily different than callbacks. It's essentially the same thing. But what's nice about this is that you can start to structure this out, right? And you can indent, and you can have then, .fail.success, and it's all about readability, people, right? You should develop your code for the, not for you, but for the moron who's going to be maintaining your code 12 months from now, and that moron is probably going to be you. So do yourself a favor and write clean code. Promises will help you do that. They are also a lot of fun to work with. You'll find that your code flows a lot better, that you can understand it, and then it's not blowing your mind. All right. Custom transports. These are fun. This should look familiar to anybody who's used Kendo UI before. This is a simple transport. Transport's part of a data source. We say read, reads, read a URL. The URL returns JSON, or if you're using Java, XML. I love you, man. And then you can also do it like this, right? This is another way to do the same thing. There's a shorthand so you don't have to pass in the URL. Just as a pro tip, you can also pass a function to read if you didn't know that, and then return a string back outside of that. But let's go back to the example that we had before, right? Which is this. This is the same example that we've been looking at all afternoon, which is this JSDO object. We fill it. We've got a deferred. We're using promises. We're fully hip. We're resolving it, and then we're manually appending the result to the DOM, which is okay, except for the fact that what if we wanted to use this data inside of a Kendo UI widget? Right? Now we've got a disconnect. I've got data. I'm returning it, but how do I get it into the widget? Well, you need it in a data source. Well, you can get it into the data source by using a custom transport. So check this out. Check the time here. Oh, we're good. We're going to finish right on time, folks. I feel like a rock star. All right. So I know. All right. So here we have a Kendo UI grid. And all that code that's up above it, that's the same class code for the JSDO that we've been looking at. And then we have a data source, and then we have a transport. And look, I'm passing a function to read instead of a URL. And then I'm calling the fill, and then and then the callback. And then I'm calling this options.success, and I'm passing in customers. And just like that, I took the class that I had, right? Didn't make many code changes, and I can now use this as a data source inside a Kendo UI grid, right? So the same results that we were getting are now in a grid. And that's awesome, because I can be like, that sucker's pageable, right? Or it's filterable. And up here, inside, yeah, page size is 5. And I can get the full power of a widget like the Kendo UI grid, right? Like that's really, right, yeah, that's really cool stuff. And it's easy to do, right? Like there's not that much code for you to go in and call that stuff and then just pass it up to the read function. This is also a good place for you to massage your data before you get it back into a Kendo UI widget. So, I mean, some of this stuff seems like when you're looking at it, it seems so complex, but really on the underlying, if you just understand a little bit below the core levels, it's really easy to do, and it makes you feel really powerful and good about yourself, right? You're like, man, I'm so good. I did a custom transport. I'm like the smartest guy ever. All right. That's how I feel, at least. And I tell my wife, and she's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, exactly. Who cares? Are you surfing the internet? Where's Ed? Ed's back there. Ed's back there. He told me his wife thinks he does email all day, right? Like she's like, right? She calls it email. Like, are you emailing? Yes, I'm emailing. All day I've been emailing. Let's look at template functions real quick. We're running out of time here. Template functions really help you get past the 80-20 hump. The 80-20 is Kendo UI will provide you 80% of what you want to do. The other 20% may make you want to slam your face on the desk. And so what we do to get around that is we use something called template functions. Now here is another piece of code, diarrhea. Not really important to digest any of this except for this template here at the bottom. Okay, so this category axis, see this template? You can't see this in the back. It just says value. It's just a templated value. Now, if we were to run this, what we would get is this chart that looks like this. Does anybody see a problem with this chart? Does it look okay to anybody? Or? Well, these labels are on the wrong side. So if you're building this chart, you would really ideally want the label on the other side, right? Because that's where it makes sense. Problem is, the chart doesn't support that. So what do? Are you stuck? No, you can actually fix this with a template function. You can do this yourself. Check this out. That's what we want it to look like, right? All right, so let's do it. Let me open this in a new tab. And so here's what we were doing before. Here's all the data here. And down here at the bottom, remember that template I just had a value? Now I've got a function. And I'm basically, on my data, I'm looping through the data and checking, is this negative data or is it, I've got it labeled left and right, but you can look for negative and positive data. And then I'm actually writing out SVG. Who in here is an expert on SVG? Oh, me neither. Who in here knows how to use the internet? Yeah, that's exactly what I did to do this, right? I'm like, well, now that I can intercept and I can write out anything I want, I can write out the SVG that the chart's going to write out. Why not? Well, I don't know how to write SVG, but I do know how to Google how to write SVG, which is what I did. And now when we run this, bam, right? Like, this stuff is easy, folks. If I can do this, you can totally do this. You just got to know the stuff that you can override. So I've now added a piece of functionality that I know for a fact there is an open request on for the Kendo UI charts. So I could wait for that to be implemented, or I could just go rock it out and implement it myself because I'm a baller. All right. Slamming. We're out of time. We have 2 minutes left. Okay, real quick, let's go fast. This is a Kendo UI mobile list view. You can use this thing inside of a web project. You don't need to be using Kendo UI mobile, but you notice it has like this cool kinetic scrolling, and I've got some sweet fake data here. All right, awesome. What if I wanted to implement that whole like swipe gesture on list views? You know how like on email you can like swipe to archive or you go left or right, stuff like that. The Kendo UI mobile list view doesn't support that. So again, what do? We built that thing ourselves, man. Right? What about this? Oh, I just blew everybody's mind. What did I use to do that? Just the existing components in Kendo UI. I'm going to scroll through and show you the code a little bit here. It does get a little verbose. I mean, we are talking about a serious piece of functionality that I've added to the list view here. There is a bit of CSS here. But you can see down here what I've basically done is I've created a touch scroller, and then I just started handling events. Because Kendo UI gives you dragging events. Dragging, before drag, after drag, on drop, didn't drop. And I'm setting things like looking at the width, setting the threshold. I'm doing a little bit of math here. I'm adding this kendo.fx, also in the documentation. That's where you get that collapse, or you get that bounce back. We provide that framework for you. Doing a little bit of animation, handling the swipe, and that's about it, right? Not a whole lot of code considering we implemented a giant piece of functionality right here. And the cool thing is that once we've implemented this, we can put it in what? A widgets, and hand it out to everybody else, and now they've got lists that they can swipe back and forth on. Very cool stuff there. More resources, folks, because we're out of time. I want, if you don't feel comfortable with jQuery, please, and these slides will be online here, I'll give you the URL. Please do this 30 Days to Learn jQuery. It's by Jeffrey Way, who's out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's just a fantastic course. Fantastic. You will know jQuery by the time you get through with it, and it's just so well done. The Kendo UI docs, I know you're like, did that dude just tell me to read the documentation? Yes. I mean, in all fairness, that's where it all is. If you're not comfortable inside the Kendo UI docs, get inside the docs. And I don't mean the getting started guides. Skip that stuff, man. Go straight to the API. All the stuff is in there, right? Get comfortable with the search functions. Cody Lindley has written a Kendo UI book. It hasn't been published yet, but you can get it for free online. You can read that there. JavaScript is Sexy is a site. They have a whole 6-week course on how you can master JavaScript, and it's all free, all of it. There's no reason, if you've got the time, there's no reason not to be doing these things. And then lastly, Cody Lindley also wrote JavaScript Enlightenment, which is available for free. He made it available for free as a PDF, and it is a fantastic book. It was transformative for me in understanding the way JavaScript works and the way objects work in JavaScript and how, it's just fantastic.
Does it include that diagram?
It does not include the diagram. There are no diagrams, right?
Question? Where is the Kendo UI book?
The Kendo UI book is online. Yeah. So if you go see this bottom link here, this will get you this entire presentation. Everything we just did, all the code samples, all the links, everything right here. Sorry, I'm going to get my hand out. Everybody's going to have a picture of the URL with a giant hairy hand underneath it. Point. Yeah, point. And also, please, the surveys, guys, please. If nothing else, just to tell me that you were here. Yeah, I was here, meh, whatever. But please do the survey. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.